What's up, fellas? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the end of the Brooklyn Nets season. As many of you know, I am a Nets fan. Stinks that their season is over, but all congrats and respect to the Milwaukee Bucks for advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals. They played great down the stretch in Game 7, made a lot of plays, and now the Nets season is over. So in this video, we're going to be talking about what happened in Game 7, what's going to be happening for them this offseason, as well as the following, as there are some interesting decisions to make with their own free agents this offseason, and the fact that all three of the big three can technically become free agents in the summer of 2022. Okay, so quickly, let's talk about Game 7. The Nets going into the game, they have Game 7 at home. We know what the percentages are. A lot of teams, most of the time, the team that is at home wins Game 7, but of course, this is not a normal circumstance. The Nets, throughout this playoff run, have been missing Jeff Green, Spencer Dinwiddie, who hurt his knee in the beginning of the year, and then for certain parts of it, either Kyrie or Harden completely, or only getting half of James Harden. And the game went about as you would have expected a Game 7 in this scenario to go. It was very back and forth. KD was fantastic. Harden looked, compromised at times. And, Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton did not have great games, but down the stretch, they made some plays. KD was a foot on the line, a toe on the line away from ending the Bucks season. If he was half an inch to an inch further back on the three-point line, the game would have ended in regulation. But that's just how it is. It's unfortunate the injuries went down the way that they did. But now the Nets are going to be looking towards their offseason and trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do to try and, worst case, just maintain the level of roster that they had this season, because obviously you don't know what would have happened with the rest of the league if everybody else had been healthy, between Anthony Davis getting hurt, the Chris Paul stuff we're now dealing with, the Kawhi stuff we're now dealing with. But if the Nets were fully healthy, they would have had as good a shot as anybody at winning the title this year. So just trying to maintain that level of roster is going to be kind of the goal here moving forward into the offseason. Now, they do have a couple of really interesting free agency situations to deal with. Jeff Green is a free agent. Blake Griffin is a free agent. Spencer Dinwiddie has a player option. And Bruce Brown is a restricted free agent. We'll talk about Jeff Green first. A guy that's clearly valuable to them, was on a minimum deal this year. I'd expect him to, worst case, get a raise, whether that's in Brooklyn or elsewhere. He's an older player, but he can defend, he can rebound, he can shoot, he can play up or down multiple positions. He's a really, really, really valuable guy to have. And if he just really wants to stick around and win a title, I wouldn't be surprised to see him be retained by Brooklyn. The Blake thing is really interesting as well. But quickly, before I get to the other free agents, I meant to cover this already. The Nets are in a really, really interesting salary cap situation where they're already at, so going into next season, you can see at the bottom, they're already at what their payroll was for this most recent year without bringing back any of these four free agent guys that I've mentioned. They're at $166 million regardless because of some of the increasing salaries they have on this roster between Harris and the big three. And so, they've got some decisions to make there. And I think the domino effect, the kind of the first domino to fall here will be what Spencer Dinwiddie does with his player option of $12 million. So keep an eye on that. We'll talk about Dinwiddie in a second, put a pin in that. So Blake, this is not a normal buyout situation. Typically, historically, guys that get bought out from their team, the following year when they're a free agent, they just sign minimum deals. That's just how it works. But Blake Griffin was not a normal buyout situation. He gave up a lot of money to get out of Detroit and go to Brooklyn and played really, really well in the postseason. Defended well, I think showed what he could do as a small ball five. And if anybody tries to tell you they know what Blake Griffin's value as a free agent is right now, they're lying. Nobody knows. It's a very odd situation to have a guy that was just on a max to get bought out, then to play well in his new team. I have no idea. Again, it's like the Jeff Green thing. If he wants a really good shot to win a title, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him stay in Brooklyn. But if he wants a bigger role, doesn't just want to be the small ball five guy that's, rebounding and defending, then maybe he'll go somewhere else and try and get more money out of it. I have no idea what's going to happen with Blake. I know that I'd really like to have him back, but if he wants to go somewhere else to get some more money, then the Nets are not going to be able to pay him a ton to bring him back. Next up, Dinwiddie. A guy that I think a lot of people forgotten that got hurt in the beginning of the year, could have been a nice, piece on this roster to kind of fill in the gaps, especially towards the postseason where guys started getting hurt as another just perimeter creator. I have no idea if he's going to accept this player option or not. I believe it's for around $12 million. You could make the case that he should just opt in, take the money, and then run it back next year and try and become a bigger free agency target in the summer of 2022 because he is coming off of an injury in which he basically didn't play the entire season. However, the other case would be if he does come back next year with the big three there, with potentially Blake there, how much is he really going to be able to raise his value playing alongside those guys when he has raised his value over the last couple of seasons as a mostly on-ball perimeter creator? That would be the question mark. So I would actually expect him to opt out of this and look for, maybe a couple year deal somewhere else that maybe he's not making 12 or maybe he's making right at 12, but at least it provides him a little bit more security for multiple years. If he does come back, he does opt in, I'd be happy to have him, but it also limits what they can do money-wise with some of these other guys when it comes to Blake, Jeff Green. And then the next guy, Bruce Brown, who's a restricted free agent, became an incredibly critical piece of this roster. He said after the game that he wants to stay in Brooklyn. He hopes that he does stay, and I hope he stays too. He had a really, really interesting role on this roster as like a 6'4" small ball 5 that was moving the ball and did a lot of dribble handoff stuff, was all over the place defensively and on the boards. I'd imagine he'd have some value as a restricted free agent, but I don't think Bruce Brown is getting like $10 million a year from any team, and Brooklyn should be able to retain him. The thing that would potentially hold them back from bringing these guys back is if they want multiple years on, bigger numbers and just the cost of it. Like going this high into the luxury tax means that every dollar you spend is going to cost that much more, and eventually you'll be at the hard cap. So if Spencer Dinwiddie opts into his option for 12 and you're sitting at 166, before bringing back Blake, Bruce Brown, or Jeff Green, you're probably going to have to pick either one or two of those guys to bring back, unless Green and Griffin just want to come back on minimum deals just to try and win a title, which would be relatively unlikely. Outside of that, they do have the mid-level exception available to again. They're going to start running into the hard cap pretty quickly, and the only way that they would kind of have some sort of flexibility there is if Dinwiddie does opt out, frees up $12 million in space, and they can kind of go from there. So kind of some interesting little things to maneuver there for Brooklyn when it comes to their free agency stuff. Moving forward past that, are there trade possibilities? Could we see some rather big changes on the roster? I would expect them for the most part to just run it back next year. There's minor possibilities that they could try and go and get somebody depending on what the salary cap situation or the payroll situation is. They have their own pick this year, which I believe is 27th. Nicholas Claxton is relatively interesting. Landry Shamet is relatively interesting. Maybe there's a Bruce Brown sign and trade, a Spencer Dinwiddie sign and trade. There are a few little pieces here if they wanted to try and go and get somebody to add to this roster. Ideally, a wing that can defend and can shoot. But other than that, I don't really see anything significant happening here. And then we move forward into next year. Let's just operate under the assumption that these guys are fully healthy next year. They run it back, and they're not successful in the postseason the way that they would hope to be, even with everybody healthy in the playoffs. Every single one of these players, Harden, Kyrie, KD, can be 2022 free agents. And this is the disaster scenario that happens all the time when you're a team bringing in, big-time free agents and the guys have player options. Every single one of their player options line up in the summer of 2022. Quick little side note, my phone just went off and Spencer Dinwiddie is going to decline his option, by the way. So there's that. But best case scenario for the Nets next year, everybody comes back healthy. They're ready to go. They win the title. All three of these guys re-sign after declining their player options. They're locked in for the next couple of years, and you go from there. Worst case scenario, there's some disagreements among the players. They don't get along. They don't perform well in the postseason. There's some frustrations, and one or two or somehow maybe even all three of them leave. Now, as of the recording of this video, I don't expect any of these guys to leave. It kind of seems like they get along well. We know that KD and Kyrie get along well. They recruited Harden to go there. And when they were all fully healthy, I think they found a good mix of their skill sets and how to play well together. And I think that they are really locked in on trying to win a title in Brooklyn. And even if it doesn't happen next year, as long as they show well in the postseason and there aren't any kind of underlying issues, I would expect this team to do well next year and these guys to come back. But you never know. Things can change very, very quickly in the NBA. We've seen it many, many times, and there's the possibility that exists that one or two or maybe even all three of these guys potentially opt out in the summer of 2022. But at the end of the day, it's an unfortunate way for the Nets season to end. Like I said, my preference would have been that everybody in the playoffs this year had just been healthy and not been missing games due to protocol stuff. I've got a video coming out about that stuff, just the crazy amount of injuries that have been happening in this postseason. It's unfortunate. The Nets, honestly, they fought well just to get it to 7 games against a Milwaukee team that's mostly fully healthy. They're missing DiVincenzo. But, I mean, this would be the equivalent of, like, the Bucks having Giannis and half of Chris Middleton for most of the series and then forcing it to 7 against Brooklyn, So I'm not like unhappy about how the season ended. I think for the most part, they did pretty much everything they could in this series. Milwaukee was healthier. They played well. All the credit in the world to them. We'll see what happens the rest of the way with them in the Eastern Conference Finals. And the Nets will just kind of turn their attention to trying to make sure they can retain most of this roster, run it back next year, make sure everybody's healthy. yeah, I mean, it was always going to be a tough situation with the amount of injuries they had and changing the roster completely in the middle of the year with a Harden trade. And so hopefully next year, even though it is a slightly quick turnaround for the teams that end up making the finals, they can all get fully healthy and ready to go by the time next year rolls around. And we'll see what happens from there. It was a fun season. It was a fun season to be a Nets fan. One of the most memorable seasons I've had as a sports fan for any of my teams. I wish it could have gone further, but that's just how it works out. But yeah, that's going to be the end of today's video. I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the box on screen, leave a like rating of the videos as well, and you can subscribe for more videos every single week. With all this being said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.